r/AskReddit. English teachers of Reddit. What is the most disturbing story/assessment a student has ever submitted? English teacher here. Had an 8th grade student write a "my life at this moment" letter to themselves that they write at the beginning of the year and read to themselves at the end. I always have a rule that they get full credit if I can just see writing on it and see it's coherent English. Though if they definitely don't want me to read it, they should staple it and I'll just look for writing. I had a girl who went over the top to look, act, sound, and be a boy. She wasn't trans, so I was a bit confused on how exactly she wanted to be viewed, so I just pretended she was tomboyish. She was also insanely defiant to her male teachers, and I worked my ass off to build a relationship with her. She wouldn't have it, though I was as kind as I could be. Anyway, the time of year came for me to pass back their letters. By this time, this girl had been moved to a digital learning lab and had been isolated from the Gen Pop. I passed all the letters out and found hers had been left unstapled, though I didn't remember reading it or noticing it wasn't sealed. Curiosity overcame me, so I opened it. My heart broke when I read her rather detailed desire to be away from her stepdad by the end of the year, and her goal for that year was to escape the godforsaken hellhole. Long story short, that letter ended up being used in court to put her stepdad away for raping her viciously for many years. I felt bad for her, but hopefully she's been able to move on, though I doubt it. The description was pretty rough of what he did to her. Students were annotating old news articles about a very famous axe murderer from the late 1800s. One student includes an annotation about how the article reminded her of her father. She helpfully included his name for me to Google, and yep, that is how I found out my student's dad is literally an axe murderer. Second place goes to a student who wrote from the POV of the Zodiac Killer for a creative writing assignment. It was incredibly well written. If it hadn't been, it honestly might have not been so disturbing. But being in the killer's head as he ties up and stabs young couples to death. No thanks. Oh, and last week someone submitted a horror story in creative writing. I swear to God, she could be a writer for Saw movies. The deaths were graphic and gruesome, and creative. I had to take breaks while reading it because I'm pretty squeamish. I have my HS students write a defining moment memoir about a moment where their lives changed in a significant way. I generally see some stories about childhood abuse and things of that nature, where I make sure our social work team is aware of their claims, they're getting support, and that's basically it. However, I did once get a story about the first time a girl in my class had smoked marijuana. Except, the whole thing was written with the weed anthropomorphized as a beautiful woman named Mary that she met and took on a beautiful all-night date. This thing was about 3 pages long and graphic. We are talking full anatomical descriptions of lesbian sex as an analogy for the experience of getting high for the first time. It just kept going and going, and it was extremely well written to the point that I was really uncomfortable reading it and had to put it away. The worst part is she was so excited for me to read it and came in the next day like, "Did you read it? Did you like it? I'm super proud." And I had to basically say, "Yeah, it's super well written, but honestly I just can't be reading something like that written by one of my students." Basically a manifesto about how the student felt ostracized from the school and how he wanted revenge. This was a community college, and he was a freshman. Over the semester, I could tell he struggled, yet he was also insanely talented. Some other students in the class bullied him in my presence, and let's just say I didn't tolerate that at all. I spent extra time talking to him and trying to help him one-on-one. One day, he turns in an assignment talking about his desire to exact revenge for his marginalization. He was triggered when everyone on his floor conspired to trick him to go outside at night in the middle of the winter, then they locked him out of the dorm. Assholes. I spoke with him immediately about it, and he assured me it was just hyperbole. Regardless, I did have to notify my supervisor. I also spoke with his rep, but the RA couldn't care less. The student ended up dropping out shortly after this. We stayed in touch for a bit, but after a while, I don't know what happened to him. He was probably the smartest student I had in that class, yet he couldn't make it because of his own personal problems and torment from other students. Ugh. TW. Child abuse. I was teaching a year 9 class, 13 over 14-year-olds. We had spent a few weeks on creative writing skills and their final assessment was to write a piece with the title "Trapped." Most kids wrote about being in prison or trapped on a mountainside or something, but one girl wrote about being trapped in a bedroom while her dad molested her. It was quite graphic and some of the things she said just seemed surreal. I really didn't think it was made up. I went to see the school's safeguarding officer who made copies of the piece, but said that I had to give feedback as normal and not to tell the girl that I'd escalated it. I found this really hard, as I thought that it was probably a cry for help and she was reaching out to me, and I hated that she might think I'd completely missed it and just treated it as a normal story. The police and social services were involved, and it turned out that the story was true. The girl and her 5 siblings were removed from the home and placed into care. It also turned out that her parents were having a lot of parties and were allowing her to be abused by other people. I left that school a few months later. In the following years, I got married and had a baby. A couple of months ago I was collecting my daughter from daycare and the girl from my class was on a college placement there. She's 18 now and getting her qualifications in childcare. She looks well and seems happy. It was so good to see her. So glad she got out. I'm an English teacher, and I've had a ton of these. I even have instances where, instead of actually writing the assignment or assessment, they go on a long confession. There's something about me as a teacher. Lots of my students wind up telling me some pretty disturbing things. Once I had students write on the prompt, "Write about your biggest fear." One student, who'd been in Thai refugee camps, as had much of the class, wrote about being in camps and being afraid to use the bathroom at night because he was worried he or his brothers would get shot. He then ended the essay, almost as an afterthought, with, "I'm also afraid of taking tests." I had another student who wrote an essay about her boyfriend breaking up with her and how she doesn't want to be here anymore. Another student wrote an essay about starvation and its effect on the body, complete with graphic details about death from starvation. Another student wrote about her mom's new boyfriend and how she didn't like him because he would look at her all the time. This student's English wasn't great, but when I talked to her, I found out she meant that he was watching her while she was getting dressed in her room. Another student wrote a detailed and accurate description of the history of the AK-47, which I suppose isn't disturbing in and of itself, but I'm still keeping an eye on this particular kid. I'm not an English teacher. I'm a math teacher, but a student showed me an English assignment once that made me concerned. In my first period math class, I had this student who gave me a lot of trouble. She had a bad attitude, hated math and would just generally be super sassy. But her friend, also in the same class, liked me and was helping to temper the attitude a bit. One day, I let them start their homework early and these two wave me over. I go over thinking they are going to ask for help with the math and instead the girl with an attitude presents me with a paper full of words and asks me if this poem seems bad. Her friend looks at me and says it's concerning. So the two of them are going back and forth about it's just a poem. But what you wrote is still scary. I'm scared for you, it's just words. I don't necessarily feel that way. So as I'm listening to them, I start reading this poem that the attitude girl had written for an English assignment. The poem talked about being unhappy with her life and not being sure she wanted to be here anymore. I agreed with her friend that it was kind of concerning and gave the paper back. Later that day, when I had a free moment, I stopped by the counselor's office and talked to her counselor about the poem. The counselor had a talk with her the next day, and you know what? After that, the girl had a lot less attitude in my class. So I think, even though she denied feeling the way she described in the poem, it was helpful for it to be reported to a counselor. I have no idea, though, if she ever turned the poem into her English teacher. I remember for my English class we had a project that we were supposed to do over the entire year and turn it in at the end. I had the idea to write a series of horror story vignettes for mine. I did not hold back with the language or graphic violence. I remember I wrote a story about a guy who is very depressed and tries to kill himself, but is saved by a beautiful woman and they get married and have kids. Then one day they are at a mall and a gunman shoots and kills his wife and kids in front of him, and he slowly loses his mind throughout the rest of the story and ends up doing what the gunman did and kills another family, then kills himself. Another story was about a man whose druggy best friend goes missing, and he tries to find him, then ends up being trapped in a torture-like compound where is then forced to murder his friend to get out, only to find out that the compound was never ending. I got a 100 and the best grade in the class. My teacher said they were so well written she found herself crying and losing sleep over the stories, so she thought I deserved a good grade. Sorry Mrs. Creelman. I may have been that student. English teacher had us reading Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. For those who don't know, that would be her autobiography that includes a graphic account of her rape as a child. Our teacher tasked us to write about ourselves at that age, comparing the privilege of being rich white girls to poor old Maya. I was attending a fancy private girls' school on a massive scholarship, lol. Like this shit has anything to do with race or tax bracket. So I wrote about my own rape. And my conclusion was basically how fucking dare she presume we were immune, because most of us were white and most of us were rich. We aren't. Statistically, at least 5 other students in the class were just as hurt and confused by her glorified, "Of course your lives are blessed" attitude as I was. I read that shit out in class. Most people cried. She did. And fled the room and didn't come back. And I was wrong. 8 other students. I got to hear all their stories, including a girl who was chased across an exclusive country club's golf green and gang raped after being knocked unconscious with a rock. Her story stuck with me the longest. I tried to start a student group for survivors of rape, incest and sexual molestation. I was told by administration that there was no point because only good girls attended the school. 15-20 years later, the student in the grade above me that was violently sodomized by a teacher she was naive enough to believe she was in a real and consensual sexual relationship with was told her parents knew what she had done and were disgusted by her and chucked on a one-way bus out of town. They gave the teacher a nice recommendation and quietly got rid of him. This shit happened when I was 16 over 17. I'll be 45 soon. And I still get enraged when I think about it. Fuck you, you smug officious bitch. Administrator, not teacher. Teacher was actually pretty sweet, just not thinking. In a university English class, we had weekly peer review assignments. One dude in the group I was assigned turned in a story, a fiction about werewolves and college student best friends out on a pre-graduation cabin in the woods party, and it was bad. His writing style was so terrible and immature, we all ended up messaging the instructor individually to find out how much work we were expected to put in editing his story. Normally we would comment on the story with whatever little corrections may need to be made, but this thing was all run-ins and wrong your slash there slash there slash there slash its. It was nuts. The friend was running in the woods as the other guy was driving at her as he tried to hit her, as the other friend screamed as a werewolf chased the car as he hit her as she rolled up on the roof of the car, and the werewolf found her body as she was trying to get up. It was brutal. He was taking the class to be a screenwriter. I still feel bad for him, and it's been over a decade. Not a teacher, was a student. We were doing a writing activity sophomore year. It was towards the end of the year, so there wasn't much to do, and the class suggested that the story each table would write would be about some janitor named Roy. So the way this worked out was that each table had 4 students and each student would have 5 minutes or less to write their part of the story, then pass it to the next person while getting the previous person's part of the next story. So at the end, you'll have 4 stories written by 4 artists. Some tables had 6, but you all get what I mean. This one dude at my table was a little out of it. I'm not sure what was up with him. I think he was trying to be funny, but he turned the one story we were working on into a scat porn story. I got his story at the end of it. It was the last writing session, and I was disgusted by this story of Roy the janitor making love to this shit lady. I just wrote they got married. The end. And then debated my life choices. I was in a creative writing class senior year with the same guy, and his sense of humor in terms of weirdness and randomness got a lot better. It has to be said with a certain voice and certain way, but the stories he wrote were hilarious and got the entire class cracking up. We are talking Billy got up from the ground, crying like the lousy monkey he was. Or Billy got poked by the stick and got healed. It was magical. Or you'll eat your Flintstone gummies. You are weak, weaker than your grandpa's resolve to live. It was just hilarious when read about by him. Quite a character. My first year of teaching in a rural rough school, I had seniors, and we were reading a modest proposal, the satirical story about eating babies as a backquote solution to several of Ireland's societal ills. I gave them an assignment to write a satirical proposal of their own to solve any social problem of their choosing. I had several kind of dark ones. After all, eating babies is a pretty dark solution to famine and the like. But one kid who already creeped me out a bit turned one in that was basically calling for genocide of everyone he deemed too dumb to exist in his world. It was thinly veiled as satire, but sort of read as a school shooter's manifesto. I turned it into the counselor, and the principal called his dad to warn him of it, but that was as far as it went. He didn't do anything, but I didn't want to be referred to on the news later as the teacher who failed to notice anything. I had this assignment. I can't remember exactly what I wrote, but it was along the lines of a perfect world, since gays were wrong, and poor people, since they were a drain on the system, we should do away with them, and Mexicans too, since they are just taking our jobs, and blacks since they are all criminals, and on until I had eliminated every race except white. Then applied the same logic to women, since after all, they're emotional, needy, and greedy, since if they divorce you, they'll take half your stuff. My last line was something along the lines of, and now that we've eliminated all the horrible others, you and all of your rich white male friends can finally be happy, since there will be no one left to hate on, right? I live in the rural south and just wanted to point out that if literally every other race, gender, and sexuality is less than in your eyes, you're probably the problem. This was 8 or so years ago. I wasn't a teacher, but my friend was the liaison for homeless youth in our local school district. We were in a band together playing at local bars. One day I went to pick her up at her office to go play a show. She looked like she had seen a ghost. I asked what was wrong. She told me she just received another elementary student on her list due to an art project where they were instructed to draw their house, people, and pets from a bird's eye view, like a blueprint drawing. She handed me the paper and my heart sunk to my stomach. They drew what was either a small single wide, or maybe even an actual camping trailer with one bedroom in the back. The child and their 3 siblings' names on the couch as their bedroom. The names of 8 dogs and 6 cats labeled with names throughout the house, 2 females and 1 male name in the back bedroom. I wanted to know more, and asked some questions. She said she really shouldn't have showed me it in the first place, and CPS was going to be involved with the school district on getting everything figured out. Okay, not an English teacher, but this was presented in my high school English class. For context, this happened a couple weeks after Columbine. So we had to write a short piece about something that meant a lot to us. Most of them were slightly goofy. I did mine about Lipton iced tea, not the brisk shit. The real stuff. Then this quiet kid gets up there and starts talking about his journal. Okay. Some kids took it seriously. Then it got dark. He is talking about how he writes about people he hates, people he wants to hurt. How he cuts out pictures of people he hates and puts them in his journal. Pictures from magazines, newspapers, yearbooks, photo albums. Tells a story about how he wanted to shoot his father during a hunting trip. Whole class is just silent. He finished up and sat down like nothing happened. Bell rings. We go to out next class. He and I happen to have next period together. To no one's surprise, within minutes, assorted staff show up and take him from class. Didn't see him for a couple weeks. Thankfully he got some help and is okay as far as I know. We ran in mutual circles, so I knew him a bit. He came out a couple years later, so I imagine that was part of everything. Have him on Facebook. Has a pretty normal life. Run into him now and again. But yeah, at the time it was pretty fucked up. I teach English online to Chinese students. Students usually attend with their parents at their side. This kid was named Roller Coaster. That was his English name that he picked. He was about 9. He was supposed to practice his conversation and tell me a story for 3 minutes. The lesson was about a bully and how bad bullying is. So before the lesson, I had him give a speech about a bully. He told me that he was the bully in his school because he hates girls. He has 3 friends that do anything he tells them do. If he tells them to hit a girl, they will hit her. If he tells them to slam the girl's fingers in her desk, they will do that. If they don't listen, he beats them up. He continued to tell me about a girl that made him mad, so he grabbed her by the hair and smashed her face against the wall and made her nose bleed. He thought it was hilarious because he said that all girls should bleed because he hates them. He really wanted to take their fingernails off one by one while they cried and wet themselves. His goal is to hurt every girl in his class at least once. He told me there are a couple of girls that don't like it and tried to stand up to him. But he has a plan. He has a gun that he is going to bring to school and teach them a lesson. It's his dad's gun. I had already tried to stop his story a couple times, and so now I thought it was a joke. So I asked if it was a toy gun. He said no, it's my dad's gun. He told me to use it whenever I need to. It's a real gun, and he has already used it once. But only on a girl, because they are the only ones that deserve it. The thing was, his dad was right next to him, and I know he speaks English, and he did nothing but sit there. He never interjected or stopped his son. Through the rest of the lesson he argued with the book because it said bullies were bad and he thinks they are good, and at the parts where the bully hurts someone, instead of understanding the moral of the story, he laughed and added all the things that he would do to that person. I don't know what the laws in China are, but I tried to report it to the company and to the parents and stuff, and no one cared. I asked other students' parents who spoke English what my responsibility was, and no one seemed to think it was shocking, and they all just said that they would just move on and continue to do their job. I worked at an English help center on a university, so I got to review a lot of poorly written papers. So much sexual assault. Creative writing where the protagonist or narrator assaults someone or recounts an assault, and confessions of victims/survivors of assault. The former we would return unreviewed with a note about the department's policy on obscene submissions. Not sure if that was the correct approach, but as a 20-something kid it was out of my hands. The latter we would usually have the psych doctor meet with them when they came back. In the same vein, you get a fair number of pretty graphic, detailed, and violent revenge fantasies. Tons of suicidal ideations. Again, those would get referred to the psych doc, and some of those resulted in campus security picking up the kid and bringing him/her to the psych office. Lots of contrarian essays. Pick a historical bad guy, Hitler, Pol Pot, Bin Laden, whatever, and you inevitably get an essay defending him and explaining why he was actually right, etc, etc. Most of those were just grabs for attention/trolls who were pretty disappointed when I returned their submissions without comment, just marked up for grammar, structure, and presentation. The winner? The one that combined all. A violent revenge against a past girlfriend who, it is implied, is Jewish. The narrator, in anguish over heartbreak, commits suicide, but is resurrected as Hitler, who finds this girl, who somehow realizes him as her ex, and tortures and rapes her, then forces her to be by his side and watch as he finishes the Holocaust. I'm usually pretty stoic, but that one made me upset. Not quite disturbing, but interesting nonetheless. I'm an English teacher for 7th grade and our classes span across 2 periods/hours. In between the classes we play silent ball, and this one kid created a cult formation with half the class. They would stand side by side to create a wall and protect him. And if he ever got out, which was rare, they would sacrifice themselves to revive him. Well, his cult, we'll call him leader, went pretty great for the next week, recruiting almost 3/4 of the class in a class of 30 people. I overheard the cult being named Czechoslovakia, pronounced Czechoslovakia. Then suddenly a group of 3 people turned on him and killed him. He was revived and such, but the end was nearing for him. A new cult had sprung up, called Awimbora, pronounced Orwimbua. The people of Czechoslovakia started, join Awimbora, and his cult was reduced to maybe 7 people. The weeks went on, and he and the Awimbora made a treaty, called Davos Dasu, pronounced Davos Dasu. Where they got these names I have no idea. Then, through leader's crazy luck and persuasive talking skills, he destroyed the Awimbora, and made a new cult, called the Mafia. The original creators of Awimbora were allowed in later on, but were very low rank. The original creators of Awimbora, just for reference, are, in this story, Player 1 and Player 2. They both made yet another evolution, and made a new cult, the Phil Swifters. I kid you not. Now leader here, he was apparently a spy, from what I overheard, for both sides. He convinced both the Mayfair and Phil Swifters that he was helping them, and was probably planning to join whatever side won. But I was wrong. He joined the Mayfair, and destroyed the Phil Swifters, and created Czechoslovakia once again. Update, ran into the leader yesterday as I was shopping. I asked him about it, and he said he thought it was dumb, but it was an amazing experience, and that he was one of his best teachers. He had one kid, who was 4 years old. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.